So I suppose the new rule in the NFL is that if you kneel for the national anthem in a national controversy then engulfs you, you get $1 million contracts from Nike, and the NFL definitely attempts for years on end to get you back into the league, despite the fact that you stink so much that you were benched for the immortal Blaine Gabbert. That, of course, is the story of Colin Kaepernick, who became rich, even richer than he was, and more famous than he was after going to the Super Bowl because he knelt for the national anthem. And despite all of the attempts to paint Colin Kaepernick as a victim, precisely the opposite is true. Colin Kaepernick was touted as a hero by large swaths in the mainstream media. He was put on the cover of magazines because he was kneeling for the national anthem, supposedly because Black Americans like Colin Kaepernick, raised in a white household that adopted him, were victims of the white supremacist system. Now, fast forward a few years, and the hot controversy of the day in the NFL is a kicker by the name of Harrison Butker. He is a kicker for the Kansas City Chiefs, and there are now calls for him to be removed from the Chiefs roster for the upcoming NFL season from some radical left fans and their allies. Why? Well, because he is a Catholic, and he gave a 20-minute commencement speech at Benedictine College, which is Catholic, in which he talked about Catholicism. That's all this is. And he said things that are very traditional in terms of men, in terms of women, in terms of Catholic theology. And this is apparently absolutely outrageous. So what did Harrison Butker say that was so wildly offensive that people now know his name? And he's a kicker. Nobody knew his name 5 seconds ago. It's not like Kaepernick, who was very famous. Harrison Butker, unless you were a big fan of football, you really had no idea who this dude is until 5 minutes ago. But now he's become a national name because the media have decided he is the root of all evil. Why? Because he's just saying the same stuff that Catholics have been saying for legitimately 2,000 years. And he said it at a Catholic college. So let's go to what Harrison Butker said that has now led all of this off. Because again, this is indicative. This controversy is indicative of the real social issues gap lying between left and right that is undergirding so much of our ugly politics these days. You have a left that has embraced transgenderism as an absolute virtue, and a right that is saying things like, hey, men and women exist and are different. And that is apparently a really bad thing. You know, when Joe Biden wonders why it is that the Rust Belt has turned against him, why it is that rural Americans don't like Joe Biden, it actually has less to do with economics than it does with cultural politics. Because let's be real about this. What Harrison Butker says here is believed and is agreed with by a huge swath of Americans, Catholic and non-Catholic alike. So here's Harrison Butker, again, speaking as a Catholic at a Catholic college, Benedictine College, about masculinity.
It is only in the past few years that I have grown in courage to speak more boldly and directly, because as I mentioned earlier, I have leaned into my vocation as a husband and father, and as a man. To the gentleman here today, part of what plagues our society is this lie that has been told to you that men are not necessary in the home or in our communities. As men, we set the tone of the culture, and when that is absent, disorder, dysfunction, and chaos set in. This absence of men in the home is what plays a large role in the violence we see all around the nation. Other countries do not have nearly the same absentee father rates as we find here in the US, and a correlation could be made in their drastically lower violence rates as well. Be unapologetic in your masculinity, fighting against the cultural emasculation of men. Do hard things. Never settle for what is easy. You might have a talent that you don't necessarily enjoy, but if it glorifies God, maybe you should lean into that over something that you might think suits you better.
Okay, 5 seconds ago, this was wildly uncontroversial. Now, of course, to suggest that men have something special to present to the world is considered controversial. And this was contrasted with his statement about being feminine and what he says about female choices. Here is what he had to say. Again, this is very traditional, and I agree with it. Here he is talking about the role of females in society at large and what brings female happiness.
Because I think it is you, the women, who have had the most diabolical lies told to you. How many of you are sitting here now, about to cross this stage, and are thinking about all the promotions and titles you are going to get in your career? Some of you may go on to lead successful careers in the world, but I would venture to guess that the majority of you are most excited about your marriage and the children you will bring into this world. I can tell you that my beautiful wife, Isabel, would be the first to say that her life truly started when she began living her vocation as a wife and as a mother. I'm on this stage today and able to be the man I am because I have a wife who leans into her vocation. I'm beyond blessed with the many talents God has given me, but it cannot be overstated that all of my success is made possible because a girl I met in band class back in middle school would convert to the faith, become my wife, and embrace one of the most important titles of all, homemaker.
Why in the world is that controversial? He's not saying don't have a career. He's saying the most important thing you will do in your life is be a wife and be a mom if you're a woman. By the way, the most important thing that I do in my life is be a father and a provider and a protector to my family. This was, again, in no way controversial 5 seconds ago, but it was this particular statement that led to 1,000 think pieces about how terrible all of this is. How dare he suggest that perhaps women find fulfillment in being married and having children? Okay, I can testify to this in my own life. My wife, of course, very famously a doctor, went to UCLA Medical School, brilliant woman. Also, the place where she easily finds the most fulfillment, and she'll tell you this, bar none, without a doubt, being a mom, being a wife. Those are the places where she finds the most fulfillment, without a doubt. And again, the lie that women can forego being a wife and a mother and find the same levels of happiness on a general level. Again, not true for every individual, but on a general level, the idea that women should forego the great joy of life in being a wife and being a mom. By the way, the parallel lie for men is that they should forego the great joy in life of being a father and a husband and a protector and a provider. Those lies have led to the dissolution of society. And when he speaks movingly about his wife, here are your choices, okay? Your choices are Harrison Butker, who speaks movingly about meeting his wife, marrying her, about having kids with her. And that's one choice. And the other choice is half the rest of the NFL who are knocking up women and abandoning their children. The NFL has nothing to say about that. Nothing. The NFL is completely silent about players like Antonio Cromartie, who has fathered half the country at this point. That's apparently totally, there's no comment necessary there. The NFL never has comment when players are arrested for a variety of crimes, including crimes against women. But if Harrison Butker says this thing, the NFL comes out and condemns him. So the NFL put out a statement saying, quote, Harrison Butker gave a speech in his personal capacity. His views are not those of the NFL as an organization. The NFL is steadfast in our commitment to inclusion, which only makes our league stronger. What exactly, have they ever issued a statement like this before? I don't recall a lot of statements from the NFL about this sort of stuff. Now, the other thing that he said that, of course, is very controversial is he suggested that there is a sin, and it is called pride. And that sin that is called pride is connected, in fact, with Pride Month. That if you are proud of things that Catholicism, Christianity, Judaism, virtually every major religion considers sinful, if you're proud of that, that is not, in fact, a good thing. And this, of course, is offensive to the social left. He wasn't supposed to say anything remotely like that. So, in the middle of the speech, he said, quote, Benedictine has gone from just another liberal arts school with nothing to set it apart to a thriving beacon of light. I'm certain the reporters at the AP could not have imagined that their attempt to rebuke and embarrass places and people, like those here at Benedictine, wouldn't be met with anger, but instead met with excitement and pride, not the deadly sin sort of pride that has an entire month dedicated to it, but the true God-centered pride that is cooperating with the Holy Ghost to glorify him. Again, this is just classic Catholic theology at a Catholic university. And yet apparently, again, there is a religion. The religion of secularism is incredibly strong and incredibly virile and is absolutely willing to stomp on anyone who gets in its way. And of course, Harrison Butker, he had the gall, the temerity to point out that top-level politicians in the United States, including the President of the United States, call themselves Catholic while constantly contravening Catholic doctrine. But again, I don't understand why even this is controversial. I say all the time on this show with regard to Judaism, Judaism has certain precepts. There are very public people who proclaim that they are Jewish only to attack Judaism or Jews, people like Bernie Sanders. That is certainly true about Catholics as well. When it comes to Joe Biden proclaiming his ardent Catholicism at the same time that he backs every single doctrine that runs directly in the face of Catholicism. I mean, that doesn't seem like amazing Catholic behavior to me. So a Catholic pointing that out at a Catholic college, why is that even controversial? I'm confused. Here is Harrison Butker.
Our own nation is led by a man who publicly and proudly proclaims his Catholic faith, but at the same time is delusional enough to make the sign of the cross during a pro-abortion rally. He has been so vocal in his support for the murder of innocent babies that I'm sure to many people, it appears that you can be both Catholic and pro-choice. He is not alone. From the man behind the COVID lockdowns to the people pushing dangerous gender ideologies onto the youth of America, they all have a glaring thing in common. They are Catholic. This is an important reminder that being Catholic alone doesn't cut it. These are the sorts of things we are told in polite society to not bring up. You know, the difficult and unpleasant things. But if we are going to be men and women for this time in history, we need to stop pretending that the Church of Nice is a winning proposition. We must always speak and act in charity, but never mistake charity for cowardice.
100% correct. So, of course, the entire social left comes out for Harrison Butker's dismissal. Lisa Guerrero, a former NFL sideline reporter, now an investigative journalist for Inside Edition, tweeted, "Hey, NFL, if you want to continue to grow your female fan base and any other marginalized group, straight white men are already watching your product, come get your boy." Now, I should point out at this point, again, Harrison Butker was saying this at a graduation at a Catholic college. Another differentiating point from Colin Kaepernick, who literally hijacked TV broadcasts of the NFL in order to politically protest the American flag. So even if you were going to call for consequences on Kaepernick from the NFL, he was doing it on the NFL field before the game as part of the actual NFL broadcast. Harrison Butker said a thing far away from the NFL field at a Catholic college as a Catholic, and people are still calling for him to be punished by the NFL. If we're going to start getting into off-field activities not punished by the NFL, that's a long list, as it turns out. Filmmaker Michael McWhorter, who has about 6 million TikTok followers, said, quote, "There's nothing wrong with his wife being a homemaker. Homemaker's wonderful. That's not the point. The point is he seems to be acting as if you should be ashamed if you don't want to be a homemaker. Or, quote, I don't know what you really want to do is stay home and have babies." That's not what he's saying. He's not saying that you should be ashamed not to be a homemaker. He is saying that the most fulfilling thing a woman will do in her life, typically speaking, is be a wife and be a mother. I don't even understand why that is. Again, these things are not controversial in a healthy, functioning society. The most fulfilling thing I do in my life as a relatively famous person who speaks every day on things that matter to me, that pales in comparison in my roles to my roles as a father and as a husband. It is not close. And that's true for every functioning human being, or should be true for every functioning human being. And a society that has decided to dismiss all of that is a society that is bound to fail. That's why these things matter. The reason these things matter is because there is a part of society that is suggesting the converse of what Harrison Butker is saying. Not that he's making a point that I disagree with for myself, but in general, it'd be good for society to have more functioning families. Not that there are social duties that we owe to one another and moral standards we ought to uphold. No, it's that Harrison Butker is so bad he must be punished for all of this. And again, this is running up directly against a social left, which is dominant in the media and now in politics as well. How it's more controversial, for example, for Harrison Butker to say all of this stuff than it is for example, the Biden administration to intensify regulations on Title IX that now mandate the use of female bathrooms by boys. One of these is a speech saying Catholic things at a Catholic university. The other is the President of the United States, a purported Catholic, pressing forward regulations that mandate the obliteration of gender in the United States. The new federal rules, according to ABC News, officially add, quote, gender identity to the list of protections from sex-based discrimination for the first time. Title IX prohibits discrimination based on sex at any institution that receives federal funding. U.S. Secretary of Education Miguel Cardona put out an announcement saying, quote, "For more than 50 years, Title IX has promised an equal opportunity to learn and thrive in our nation's schools, free from sex discrimination. These final regulations build on the legacy of Title IX by clarifying all our nation's students can access schools that are safe, welcoming, and respect their rights. Schools could violate Title X if a transgender person is not allowed to use the bathroom aligned with their gender identity or if they are not referred to by their chosen pronoun." Do you understand what that means? That means that any school that is bound by Title IX, if a boy comes into the classroom and says, "I am a girl," the school is now bound by federal law to treat that boy as though he is a girl. And somehow that is less controversial to our mainstream media than the idea that, you know, the most important role you're going to play in your life in your life as a wife, as a mother, if you're a woman, as a father and as a husband, as a protector, as a provider, if you're a man. That's the fundamental underlying cultural conflict in the country. It is not about economics. And there's been this attempt to suggest that what the real battle is, it's an economic that's a really Marxist materialist way of looking at how people make decisions in their voting lives and in their politics. The real answer to why you've got this huge yawning gap that has emerged in the United States is a culture gap. It is a culture gap between the values of San Francisco and New York, culturally speaking, and the values of like Youngstown, Ohio. That is the massive culture gap. It is a massive culture gap between people who believe, generally speaking, like Harrison Butker, and people who generally believe like Joe Biden's minions. That is the yawning culture gap. And guess what? Joe Biden is in the minority on these positions. It turns out that most Americans don't really care what you do in the privacy of your own home. At least they don't want the government involved in that sort of stuff. With that said, they still do believe in the fundamental building blocks of a healthy society. I mean, Xavier Becerra, who's the Health and Human Services Secretary, he literally came out yesterday and said that the federal government would withhold funding from any religious institution that doesn't do sex change operations on kids. How is that somehow in our society less controversial than Harrison Butker saying things that are just in line with traditional biblical values?
You've put out this guidance and doctors do need to know.
Yes.
What are you going to do if they refuse to provide this care?
A doctor, if that doctor has religious objections, that doctor under these rules is not required to offer the care.
Okay, so you're committing here today that you will not withhold federal funding.
Doctors don't get federal funding, ma'am.
But the hospitals do.
So now talk to me about the hospital.
Are you saying that
Don't confuse the two.
Okay.
A doctor's not a hospital.
But the doctors are working in these hospitals. Are you going to say today, are you committing that you will not withhold federal funding from those healthcare facilities?
If a healthcare facility is violating the law and not providing the service they're required to, they are not entitled to the resources.
So any hospital, a Catholic hospital, for example, that says we are not going to trans the children, that hospital now is at risk of losing any federal funding at all, which is insane. That is the yawning cultural gap. That is the thing. The single most important quote of the last 30 years in American politics is the Barack Obama 2008 quote that the people of the United States who were not voting for him were clinging to God and guns and religion. This is what Democrats, top-level Democrats, elite Democrats believe. It's the same thing that Nancy Pelosi said the other day at Oxford Union when she suggested that she has all the proper policy prescriptions, but they're being impeded by all these weird people who believe in things like God, which is an amazing thing for a supposedly religious Catholic like Nancy Pelosi, who clearly is not particularly religious, considering she backs every violation of Catholic doctrine you can find, to say. That's an amazing thing to say. So good for Harrison Butker. And again, the controversy surrounding Harrison Butker is just a beautiful example of the culture gap that has emerged in our society. Because it used to be, even when I was growing up, this stuff was uncontroversial, wildly uncontroversial. It is not a contradiction to say that a woman should have every ability and right to work if she wants to work in any job for which she is qualified. And also the most fulfilling thing she's going to do in life is be a wife and be a mom. Those are not contradictory at all. And it is not contradictory at all to suggest that America ought to be a tolerant and diverse country that retains moral standards with regard to personal conduct, because that is important to a functioning society. The fact that you have honestly, Harrison Butker versus Colin Kaepernick is a pretty good indicator of right versus left in the country right now. I think more people agree with Harrison Butker than agree with Colin Kaepernick. Not in the media, however.